And we're live.
And you're alive. And you're alive.
And I'm alive. Yes, 2 weeks into January. Still
You're
here.
still alive.
Still
It's
here.
remarkable.
Yeah. Next week, maybe. Maybe not. We'll see.
Yeah.
Joe, last week.
Well, you didn't get the vax, did you? Go on ahead. Last week, what?
Yes. No. I don't disclose. That's personal. You're not allowed to ask that.
Shut up, you're not
Okay.
allowed to ask that.
No. I'm going to keep it a secret. You notice all these people on Twitter and wherever else, they're constantly polling their
Yeah.
readers or baiting them in with questions,
Yeah.
They want to divulge. What's your experience with the vax? If you got it, were you vaxxed or not? How many did you get?
Do
Constant
you know
polling.
anybody who's...
Who, like, I mean, it's innocent enough. Most people don't have anything to hide. They're safe. It won't be used against them. But you should be careful on Twitter. Like, anything you say or do on Twitter can and will be used against you. Not so much in a court of law, perhaps, but eventually in a court of public opinion. Those people, like, constantly trolling for data, they may be well-intentioned. They just want to get a snapshot of Vox Populi, right? What's going on, what people think about an issue. But what we've now seen from all these Twitter files that the agencies are watching everything, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. What were you going to say last week, what?
Last week, I was like, what in the hell is Joe Quinn talking about? Because I was genuinely like trying to figure out, because we hadn't discussed it beforehand, but you came up with this thing that I've now abbreviated to the Obi-Wan Kenobi theory of U.S. politics, which, you know.
Who was Obi-Wan? That was Trump, yeah.
Trump was
right.
Obi-Wan.
Oh, I just made that up on
the
spot
spot
last week.
Yeah, but it's cool. It's a cool metaphor for what you were trying to explain, but I was still trying to wrap my head around it by the end. It's only been in the weeks since last week that I kind of understand what you're talking about because of all that's happened. Fits into a framework of what you're talking about. So for reference, we showed the tweet by Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the, rebel
Alliance.
GOPers, Rebel Alliance, House of Representatives for the GOP. And she had her wish list of, okay, now we've got McCarthy Speaker, this is what we're going for. One of those items is already checked off the list. Let's just put it up. We don't have to reference it, just to refresh with people. This is Fox News reporting it. Now, an American colleague of ours chimed back in when we pointed this out to him, and he said, yeah, but this will never happen because it still has to go to the Senate, and the Senate's Democrat controlled, and it'll never pass. Still, that may be the case. We'll see. Last week's news on Fox: House votes to rescind billions in funding to the IRS in first majority action with McCarthy as Speaker. That was the first item of 3 on her list. Now, the 2 other items, one of them, I suppose, is already underway. The second item on Green's list was investigate Joe Biden for possible impeachment, right? What was it specifically? Hunter Biden laptop and or Ukraine.
The documents. Oh, yeah.
The documents came after. That's the queer thing about this week. Okay,
yeah, they wanted to investigate him for Ukraine, Hunter Biden laptop, basically. They've been talking about that for a while, yeah.
Yeah, 10% for the big guy. Okay, second item. This was not on her short list of 3, but this is one you predicted. Because this would be something that would signal the overall change in focus, if there is to be such, of the overall ship of state changing its trajectory. So, again, an American colleague of ours said, yeah, but that's not going to go anywhere. We'll see, though. We'll see. This has been already signaled in the first week of January, first week of the new Congress. Something that you predicted that was going to happen. It's from the Hill. House easily passes resolution to create bipartisan China Select Committee, which would focus on U.S., you see that in the first paragraph, committee would focus on U.S. competition with China, fulfilling a campaign promise Republicans made in the lead up to the midterms. That's with a view to upcoming trade war, sanctions against China, and down the road, possible kerfuffle over Taiwan. Okay. Here's the third item, not on Green's list, but I'm sure they all wanted it, right? What makes this especially strange is that We're going to listen to Matt Gaetz, the sort of spokesman of the Rebel Alliance of the GOP, talk about this unexpected success on Fox News. Because this is not something he'll say this here at the beginning. Let's have a listen.
Transparency is the only solution. And it looks like we're going to get some. And that's thanks to the new Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and to the small group of Republicans who pushed him in that direction. Matt Gaetz of Florida is one of them who joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. How gratifying is it you didn't want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker, you said it many times, he became Speaker, and now he's doing something that you've been calling for. How gratifying is this?
Bravo, Speaker McCarthy. This was not an agreement that we had at the beginning of last week, but as the week progressed, Speaker McCarthy, to his great credit, understood this was important to a great many of us. And when we get this 14,000 hours out, we're going to be able to see the extent to which the federal agents and assets that were present that day may or may not have increased the level of criminal acuity. We're going to be able to see their coordination with one another. And we're also going to be able to see if there's exculpatory evidence that would show that people never intended to violate a law, even though they might have been technically out of compliance with whatever the standard was at that time based on the vice president's movements that they probably weren't aware of anyway. It is interesting, though, that at every time from the JFK files to 9/11 to now January 6th, it's our own government, it's our own Department of Justice that seems to stand in the way of transparency. The Speaker of the House is now fulfilling the commitment he made to us, and he deserves a great deal of credit for it.
Okay.
Amen.
That's
I
enough
feel
of
the
that.
same way, and I had similar.
I may have called that wrong. I think he said they didn't initially seek that from McCarthy, but as the week went on and the votes, maybe they did get it.
It was. I mean, they have been talking about it, like, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure. Matt Gaetz wanted that, but I think he's like a little surprised that he's pushing that already.
Yeah.
Again, though, I'm not jumping any gun here. The chances of J6 insurrection being investigated are slim, but still. My point is that everything is going their way since last week.
Which is very strange, yeah.
Then, on top of that now, suddenly Joe Biden has a special counsel called against him for hiding classified documents. So, like, it's been one-way traffic for the quote-unquote far right of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Since then.
And then you look at the media. If you just look at this headline, and this is just from actually today. This is from today, and it's it doesn't really matter, that's in the UK Telegraph, but was this the week Biden lost the next election, you know? So there seems to be whether it's just evidence, stuff coming to light or whatever, that obviously means that Biden wouldn't be eligible, wouldn't be appropriate or eligible for running in 2024 again, as he says he wants to, supposedly, or whether there's some movement behind the scenes to get rid of him in a certain sense, to make sure that he isn't eligible, whereas, we know very well, given the Hunter Biden laptop story and a bunch of other things, his own clear evidence of likely corruption in Ukraine, and probably a host of other misdeeds that have been covered up. They can be covered up. They have been covered up. Cover up in the sense of, okay, it comes out in one way or another from various different reports, but nothing is done about it. The mainstream media and the political establishment in Washington D.C. makes it go away. It doesn't gain any traction, right? And inside Congress, especially up until now, you could put all this on the fact that they lost in the midterm elections, they lost control of the Congress, and suddenly there's this massive push.
That's what it appears to be.
Right, and that's what it is. That's certainly a major factor in it, obviously, but there isn't an awful lot of pushback against it. There's a certain level of, seems to be a certain level of connivance among the Democrat leaders, probably in both Congress and the Senate.
And the media's coverage of it.
And the media obviously falls in line with that then, because they do whatever the wind seems to be blowing, they follow. And it seems, there's definitely, one way or another, there's a move afoot to make sure that Joe Biden isn't eligible for a re-election in 2024. Isn't eligible even to put his name in the hat, basically, until for the next election.
Carlson's theory is that Joe Biden spoke up around midterms, early November, to say that he was thinking of running again when it had been assumed that he wouldn't. He was too old.
Right.
And it was at that point that this sort of, let's have a scandal, or let's allow a scandal to percolate to the top of CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, was signaled. Okay, go ahead. We want to signal to him, and that's not happening.
It's not happening. Yeah, and the White House, obviously, the president is, for most presidents, it's largely a ceremonial position. They don't really know much of what's going on behind the scenes. They get to know. They're always the last to know, or often the last to know about certain things. So, I mean, people should know that by now, that the office of the president, for most presidents, is a ceremonial position. It's only when you have someone like Trump who comes along, isn't a political insider, and decides, it says here I'm the commander-in-chief, I'm going to go ahead and use all of the power that I can possibly, that is available to me as the president to do what I want. Basically not fall in line with what the establishment behind the scenes, the intel agencies, the career Democrats and Republicans, even, long-term congressmen and senators, in what they want. When you push back against that, then you get into a world of hurt, world of pain. But as the saying goes, if you strike me down, you will make me more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And that's my Obi-Wan Kenobi reference, which is, I'm not saying it's as simple as that, obviously. But the Republicans, what's bizarre, and I said this last week, what's strange, for all the denunciation and trashing of Donald Trump over the entire 4 years, even before, of his administration, he seems to have had an enduring impact on American politics. He's gone now, and although Matt Gaetz and others have said, that, and even McCarthy said during the election for Speaker that, Trump was front and centre, and he has a lot of influence still.
And that he backs me.
Right. He has a lot of influence because, you have to assume the only, rational conclusion as to why Trump still has influence and why there are, dozens of members of Congress who appear to be hardcore Trumpers is that Trump's message was solid, rational, reasonable, welcomed by a large percentage of the Republican electorate, and also more surprisingly, amongst the Republican politicians, who until now you would have been forgiven for thinking, well, they're just putting on a show. They're rhinos, right? They're not really Republicans.
Right.
They're just part of the establishment. They're just in it for themselves. They don't really care about the people. But it seems that what Trump was trying to do took hold and found fertile ground in their minds and is practicable. Is something that their policies, and it's an agenda. It's a political perspective. It's a domestic and foreign policy agenda that can be, and in many people's minds should be, implemented, and makes a lot of rational sense. It's a weird thing to say about Donald Trump, that because when you look at the way he was presented, he was a complete nut job, right?
Yeah.
He had no idea what he was doing. He was a liar. He just lied every time he spoke. He had no idea what he was doing in the White House. He was just feckless. He's just a racist and a misogynist, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was deplorable. 4 years of deplorableness, and nothing got done. And then you look at now, and it's like, well, there's a thing called Trumpism. It's a political theory, essentially. It's not a new political theory. It's basically America first. It's in those 4 letters. Make America great again, i.e. put America first, focus on American needs, stop sending money all over the world. Basically roll back the American empire to some extent. At least a little extent, and that's actually part of one of the things that these the Freedom Caucus, these 20 odd plus a lot of other Republicans, obviously, and even Democrats are supporting.
Yeah.
Well, they want to cut back the defense budget for 2023 back to, and it's not radical. It's just keep it at 2022 levels.
That was
yeah,
another one I forgot to mention.
Right.
Yeah, $100 billion slash.
Right.
In the defense
Which sounds
budget.
like a lot, except you realise that
Agreed
it's
by the AOCs
10%.
over on the other side of the chamber.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, that means, of course, keeping it at 2022 levels means, well, people are worried about Ukraine. What about Ukraine? They're going to lose if we don't keep sending them money. But no, that implies you have to send them more money this year than last year. If you're keeping it at 2022 levels, that means there's still the amount of money that was sent to Ukraine in 2022 is still available in 2023, right? You're just not allowed to up it, but they do want to up it, obviously, or at least they're making sounds recently about increasing Bradley fighting vehicles and obviously Patriot air defense and whatever else they can dream up.
Maybe I think they're waiting to see what Russia does next.
Yeah,
that's another topic for later, I guess. Just to clarify here, we're not suggesting that Trump. This is the long hand of Trump reaching into Congress.
I am suggesting that, yeah.
Well, you are, but only with the tacit acknowledgement and acceptance, not only of the Democrats, but the intelligence community, the permanent members of the deep state, who survived from administration to administration, with their tacit acknowledgement. They'll never say it. They'll never say Trump was right. But what you're suggesting as part of this theory is that they're putting into action
what Trump
things
wanted
that
to
Trump
do.
wanted.
Yeah, basically a protectionist.
But they'll never let him get credit for it.
No. Basically a protectionist. Protectionism.
Yeah.
Essentially, economically, well, mainly economically, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right?
And part of that is shaft Europe, deindustrialize it, whatever.
Absolutely.
Bring German business over here.
Right. Do whatever you can basically play hardball economically with your competitors. And at this point, they've realized that, I think that's the shift, is that they realize that America's competitors is more or less everybody else in the world.
Yeah.
It's
including the allies of the beautiful, coalition of the
of course,
NATO
they're all ripe for the picking as well.
It's equal opportunity. Whether you're Russia or Germany or the UK, you're all
Doesn't
ripe
matter.
for it's America first.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you meant.
So they're doing America first, basically. They're was that Trump's slogan as well? America first. I don't know.
Yes,
somebody's.
Yes, well, it also goes back to. He didn't know this, but part of the reason why it's so easy to paint him as a Nazi is that America First was the slogan of the American Nazi Party in the 1930s.
Wow.
Yeah. So
It's weird how
oops.
an idea like that gets
So
tarred.
on top of his terrible week, given all these items going against the Democratic president's, position and agenda and so on, then he goes to visit the border. That was it was so bad. Biden, they cleaned up El Paso, for his visit. And it was obvious that they did. And everyone in the US got to see it. It was such a Potemkin village moment. Where they used to slander the USSR for cleaning things up whenever the Politburo would come to visit. That totally backfired. And then classified documents are being found in his home. Here's another batch and another batch. Oh my God. 20 so far, or there's more to come or something. The giveaway in that, though, is that if you read the first paragraph or two of any of the stories about this, is that the documents are found and reported behind Biden up the chain of command by his own staffers. So, it's a scandal, but it's it's an in-house manufactured,
well, it's more
carefully cultivated.
More evidence that they're trying to retire Biden in advance of 2024 or whenever the next election cycle starts. They're trying to retire him, make him just not eligible, make him not eligible for running again, basically. And it's possible because the stuff we've talked about is probably only the tip of the iceberg, So the documents, and I don't know if they'll get very far with the Hunter Biden laptop or Ukraine. Probably not, because it goes too far into intel agency operations and all that kind of stuff. Likewise with January 6th. Don't think they're going to get very far with that, because it implies or implicates the intel agencies, and they're untouchable, right? But there's probably a bunch of other stuff about Biden, that could come out unless they push him off stage.
Hopefully, I guess, through the Special Counsel.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Setup.
Yeah. That they're worried, the Democrat establishment and even the DNC, the Democrats, but the intel agencies as well, who have a hand in all this, and how America looks to the world and all that kind of stuff, and the perception of the American president. they could be worried that if Biden were to run again and have 8 years, that over the course of that time, it could come out that he's, done lots of other very unsavory things. And you wanted to say, listen, let's not go there, let's...
They'd like a voluntary retirement on his part.
Voluntary retirement.
Nixon-esque.
Right.
Goes out,
Yeah. With good reason for it, if you know what I mean, that he did behave badly, he did, commit make some mistakes, etc., etc. Enough to just say bye-bye. But the documents thing is hilarious. Like, that's pretty much... Well, it's not known because officially, but it's very likely that every other president, that taking home documents, top secret, is a nothing. It was always seen as a nothing burger, no big deal, almost entitled to do it. Like, Trump made that allegation, or made that claim in his defense, that I'm entitled to take any documents I want back with me, wherever, as president, right? But it's basically a nothing burger. It doesn't amount to, it's not something that up until today, up until Trump, anybody would have used to attack and try and defame and get rid of or unseat or whatever, impeach after the fact a president. But they did it with Trump and it was on the heels of all the other stuff they did to Trump throughout his administration, the Russiagate and the blah, blah, blah. So they still wanted to go after him to get something, to really, bury him completely, right? Even after the fact this year.
The arrest in Mar-a-Lago.
Him taking
raid.
His documents home and the raid and all that kind of stuff, and talking about, criminal charges, etc. But you do that, then you obviously leave Biden open to the same thing. And any other president, if you wanted to go back in history, is there any reporting back? What about Obama, Bush, Clinton? Let's go back to them to see if there's any evidence or any. Can we dig up some evidence that they took documents home as well? Oh yeah, so, you know what I mean. So he's hoisted his own petard in that sense, where they went after Trump, and now it applies to Biden. So, but somebody probably came up with that as a good way just to get rid of Biden.
Yeah. Well, there is an extra element to the classified documents issue with Biden, that he had the documents in his home prior to becoming president.
Right. As VP, yeah.
Yeah, he kept them as VP.
But even then.
Right. So that would have been
big deal.
That would have been big deal, exactly.
You're talking here about documents that he was allowed to see, keep around as president. He'd refer to these documents, classified documents on whatever topic, and then after he's no longer, after he loses or he's no longer president, it's a massive crime to have them still in your house.
An impeachable offence.
It's nonsense.
Yeah. So
what's interesting though is that on related topic is why, if what we're saying is true, why Trump wasn't allowed to push through his version of America First, whereas his ideological kind of descendants in the Freedom Caucus, Matt Gaetz and all those people, are allowed to do it, unless it now is so basically the idea is what Trump was saying. There was absolutely nothing wrong with what Trump was saying. It made absolute sense, and it was probably the best thing. His policies were probably the best thing from the point of view of the interest of ordinary Americans. It was the best policy. His administration, if he had been allowed to do what he wanted to do, he was totally on the right track. Far better than what the Democrats, Obama, whoever else done beforehand, especially in terms of foreign policy, but also domestic policy. Infrastructure, stop sending money overseas, stop engaging in wars overseas, build the country, make jobs, get companies to invest and produce here, right? That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's never a crazy, ridiculous idea, but it was because it was Trump. Mm-hmm. But so now it's fine for them to run with that idea now. The whole establishment can run with those policies now because it's them running with it, and they can control it, and it can be, well, they'll get the benefit from it, right? They'll get the kudos. There was something about Trump, the person, that went beyond. You know what I'm saying? That went beyond those policies themselves, and something they were afraid. I don't know. I think it must be just like, as much as I derided the office of the president there, the White House. There's obviously it can have a lot of influence and power if it's in the right hands.
Yeah.
Because even if they don't, he can be denied information, and obviously we know intel agencies can carry on operations with no oversight whatsoever, and Congress are a bunch of thieves. But if even just the ceremonial position as representing America, every word he would say has impact. You know?
Yeah.
So he couldn't be relied on to say the right words, or the words that were in keeping with the agenda of the Washington establishment. So he had to go. But policies in general can be pursued. His policies can be pursued as long as it's not under him.
That, and he would probably have continued being a less aggressive American about, even if it's about MAGA and shafting Europe in some way. Because remember, he was slagging off Germany for its dependence on Russian energy, and that was a forewarning to what came next. But would Trump have signed off on blowing up Nord Stream? Maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah.
He never started. He didn't start any wars, Trump.
But did anybody sign off? And did Biden sign off? Well, he probably did.
Here's an example.
Again,
Here's an
I don't think
example
they
of
sign
something
off.
that was just business as usual. But it can't be Trump seen to have succeeded in it. The U.S. drawdown from Afghanistan was signed by Trump,
Right.
but that happened only a year later.
Right.
It was actually blocked at the time, and it was only a year later that Biden, 8 months into his, gets to go, I took us out of Afghanistan. Now that kind of backfired because of the images that came out of it. It looked like the withdrawal from Saigon, but it might not have happened that way if Trump had been more of an overseer of it, because he certainly railed against how it went down. But it was his baby. So when he was doing it, though, the madman, we're never leaving Afghanistan. That's a crazy idea, absolutely crazy. And behind closed doors, it's like, yeah, this is good.
And why were they leaving Afghanistan?
Well, we now know Ukraine.
Which is interesting because it was 6 months before, 8 months before Russia invaded Ukraine. So 7 or 8 months before that actual invasion, the US was in their own, and this is from, I think it's from who was it? Wasn't Miley, it was somebody from the Pentagon, basically, or the Department, Secretary of Defense, a few weeks ago said that if we did not leave Afghanistan, we would not have been able to provide the military support that we are to Ukraine, which implies foreknowledge, or a strong suspicion that this was coming down the pipeline. And of course, that's the case. I mean, they probably expected that. The Americans expected the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and were planning for it, and were facilitating it several years ago. They were building up to that situation.
Yeah.
It's weird to think of it in those terms, that America wanted Russia to invade Ukraine. Maybe on their own timeline, and maybe when Russia invaded was a bit too early. They had a timeline for it, so they leave Afghanistan in July, August, whatever, 2021. Oh, 2022. What year are we in?
21.
Sorry, that's
August
a whole year
21.
gone by. Yes, 2021. Then, and then maybe a year later would have been good. The summer of 2022 would have been good for Russia to invade Ukraine, but then Russia decides to go in advance on its own time frame, and they're not happy about it, so they start screaming and shouting in the media and trying to kind of forestall it in a certain sense. But definitely people, I mean, it's weird to think about it, but because you get into like the whole thing's planned, right? But in this day and age, a lot of things at that level are planned, you know, whether you think it sounds weird or conspiratorial or too much of there's too much organization required in doing that. That's the way things happen. I mean, America has been a global hegemon, and we've been living in the American empire for arguably 70 or 80 years. You know, and so there's a lot of coordination of events that occur in the empire that that are planned well in advance. A lot of events that appear to just occur in the empire are well coordinated beforehand, because they have the ability to do it. If you have the ability to coordinate something, you coordinate it. You know, that doesn't mean you control Russia, etc. Blah blah blah, but it definitely means that. I mean, we know there's strong circumstantial evidence that America was, after the coup in 2014 in Ukraine, that they were arming and training and equipping and funding the Ukrainian military, building it up in order to pose a threat to Russia, which I mean, that's not much of a stretch, right? Because that would just be seen as America. This is their almost peer enemy, let's say, that threatens American hegemony. Let's attack. How can we attack Russia today or this year? What's our plan for attacking Russia this year? Because they're our enemy, and China, and you say, well, Ukraine's good option there. You know what I mean? I mean, it's right on Russia's border, and it's we can easily the political system and the political figures there are amenable. They're easily persuadable. So why don't we use Ukraine to put a bit of pressure on Russia? And so you do that, you start building up the Ukrainian military, and then you go, well, if we keep doing this, Russia's probably going to do something about it. And then as the time passes, you realize, yeah, Russia is going, and years in advance, you realize that that's going to be the obvious. If you haven't assumed it beforehand as part of the plan, you realize very quickly that what you're doing is going to provoke Russia to ultimately invade Ukraine. So it's not like some wahaha, we have this grand plan. It's simply, it's geopolitics.
Yeah.
It's the outplaying of geopolitics. And
in hindsight, it was happening under our noses.
Right.
Just that they're smart at not drawing attention to it.
Yeah.
And the control of international financial markets and media, or a large influence, helps in that respect. Because that's how 1 billion Westerners wake up on February 24th, 2021 and go, good God, what just happened?
2022.
22. Look at that Putin madman. He just invaded his neighbour out of the blue.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, where the
It's so
fuck were
pathetic,
you
like-
lot for the last 8 years? 16,000 people dead,
Yeah.
It wasn't just out of the blue. Do you want to flesh out the addendum to your Obi-Wan Kenobi theory?
I don't have an addendum to that.
There
do I?
is, because you gave it to me later in the week.
I
Maybe
forgot
it's
about
a
it.
step too far. Maybe it's too conspiratorial, or it gets too vague at that point. But you were suggesting to me that the Republicans are going to get, are in the process likely in the process in this next 2 terms, and possibly then in 2024 with the next presidential election, of getting what they want. It's going to be MAGA-style Congress. And in practice, too, MAGA-style strategic developments on the world stage for the U.S. empire. But what you suggested was that this is a setup for the fall, whereby when it goes to hell in the handbasket, who's going to be getting the blame for it? Republicans.
Right. Yeah.
And Trump and conservatism and Trumpism generally.
Right.
It's
It'll be the last
it
laugh.
was the selfish MAGA. I look after me and number one.
That crashed the economy.
That crashed the economy,
Yeah.
just the US and or global system, probably globally.
Well,
because of
if it's American, if the U.S. economy collapses, it's global.
yeah.
But yeah, I just that would seem to be. I mean, if you assume that the the economic forecast, you don't have to assume it. The economic forecasts for the international community, let's say for the Western world, are not good, and they have been repeatedly not good. We've been given dire warnings of impending economic doom repeatedly for, I don't know how far you go back, but certainly over the past year or 6 months, over and over again, we've been told recession coming, serious problems, and then problems in food prices. Obviously, with all of the geopolitical aspects around Ukraine, cutting off Europe from cheap Russian oil and gas, and forcing it to be dependent on American gas in particular, and oil, is not good, So if you assume that that's following a trajectory, that it's going somewhere, and it seems to be, then it makes sense on the one hand why the Washington establishment would get on board with a protectionist approach from these Republicans that control Congress, because it makes sense. It makes very practical sense in this new world. Because like Putin talked about the multipolar world, that basically the Ukraine invasion was part of the first step, or a major step, in transitioning from a unipolar world dominated by America to a multipolar world where the pie is shared. Now, if the pie is shared, America loses immediately because it had the lion's share of it. But we may be in a multipolar world right now. It's not like coming down the line. It's not like in 10 years or something like that. It's more or less now that the changes towards a multipolar world aren't all going to happen at once. It's not just one change from one day to the next. Obviously, it happens progressively. The Americans get wind of that and realize this, and there's a little bit of realism still available to them. to the the establishment, DC establishment, where they realize they have to restructure, they have to change their approach to how they did business in the world, how they ran the empire, by basically pulling back from the empire, because the empire is no longer reliable. They have no longer the same amount of control as they had for many decades before now. And when you don't have that control, it means you do, to protect yourself, you have to pull back, because bad things can happen, and that includes economically. You have to start playing more, instead of handing out, imperial cookies
Bribes.
or bribes or whatever. You start cutting that off, because the people you're giving bribes to, they're not reliable
Yeah,
anymore.
it's
They're not your partners. They're not your vassals anymore.
They
They're-
take your bribe and then they go to the G20 and shake hands with Putin
Right.
and agree to
Right.
a massive oil deal or whatever.
Right. So it makes sense that people would, that the Americans, the whole establishment would be, even as much as the Democrats are reluctant to agree with anything Republican, especially the hardcore ones like Shifty-Eyed Schiff and Chuck Schumer and people like that, and that little penguin guy. The guy who should have played the penguin in Batman movies.
Nadler.
Nadler.
Jerry Nadler.
People like him, as much as they're reluctant, they realise as well, or they're being told by the people in the know and intel agencies, listen, this is probably a good idea. We do need to change our approach to how we run the empire, basically, and we need to institute some cutbacks. Because it's not so reliable out there more. It's a bit of a jungle out there now, So
And
at the same time, though, the policies that they would pursue under the aegis of that kind of American protectionism may provoke some kind of a, like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, may provoke some kind of an upset or kerfuffle or whatever with China. That may lead China to take Taiwan. And if that happens, there's various different things could happen that would set the whole global economy, would give it a serious shake and maybe tilt it on its ass, basically. And in that, so it's going that, it seems to be going that direction anyway. So while on the one hand it makes sense for the establishment to get on board with this protectionism, they probably, a lot of them, or some of them anyway, know that things economically things are going pretty bad anyway, and that who better to have in control of American foreign policy, in this shift in American foreign policy, which is supposedly meant to protect America, but will actually end up, or could be construed as having ended up, destroying the American economy, or causing a global economic crash that upended the American economy or whatever.
I can definitely see the day coming where they blame Trump for it.
Yeah.
And it'll have been 8 years, since Trump was anywhere near the White House.
Yeah.
But it's still his fault.
Right.
I mean, last week in Brazil, that was Trumpism.
Right.
Trump personally was at fault for that,
Yeah. Well, Brazil was interesting because, I mean, I'm more than happy for people to say that it was exactly the same as January 6th. It was just a South American version of the January 6th insurrection. If you accept what the January 6th insurrection actually was, and I don't think we'll get much out of these tapes. 14,000 hours of tapes? Who's going to watch all those? Anyway, what January 6th very clearly was, if you have any ability to kind of just read between the lines over the past 3 or 4 years, January 6th was a deliberate attempt to demonize Trump. In the same way they wanted to, frame him up for Russia, they wanted to frame him up for stealing classified documents, etc., etc. January 6th was an attempt to do that. You weaponize a crowd of supporters, infiltrate them, turn them into a bunch of rioters, and then boom, get the news cycle going, and he's demonized as a... So yeah, it looks to me that the same approach was taken to Bolsonaro.
Right.
Bolsonaro was holding out, at least his supporters were holding out, claiming fraudulent election. It was almost like exactly the same. The allegations around the substance of both were exactly the same. In Brazil,
There was
allegations
even
by
a guy
right-wing
with the horns.
I know, yeah.
And the face paint.
How did that happen?
Bare-chested tattoos.
I think that was a put up. Either the guy himself decided to do it because they were emulating, and that's possible. They were emulating January 6th because of the media coverage of it, or someone was bussing in, and there are questions in the Brazilian media about who was, and in the Western media as well, about who was bussing in all these people, these buses that came from no one knows where.
Well, Yeah, I read a report about it. So it's quite detailed. Brazilian intelligence. Oh, there he is. Yeah,
There's the-
that picture of the day.
The American or the Brazilian.
That's the guy last
Shaman.
January 8th. It was just after our show, actually, the news broke. That's why we're only talking about it now. Brazil's shaman. And it's weird is that it's going to go down there as J8.
Yeah.
And like, why January for them? Their election was in October, yeah. But the reason it came to a head in DC 2 years ago was because on that day was the last chance for Congress to reject the electoral votes.
For inauguration,
hence the pressure and the rally in DC that day. But in this case, it's done and dusted. There was a ceremony last week, and Lula has, it took place here where they ended up rioting. But it was done and dusted. It was a week later. The place was empty.
Yep.
So someone chose the day close to J6. I don't see any other reason for why they chose. They should have done it surely during the inauguration of Lula a week prior. But anyway, the 2 days prior to this, Bolsonaro leaves Brazil.
Goes to Florida.
Or maybe a week short, because he didn't turn up for the inauguration like Trump, and therefore, in a sense, was, flicking his. He's saying, "I don't approve of this handover of power." Traditionally, one gives the sash, a presidential sash, to the next. He didn't do that, so he takes off to Florida, and I thought, "What's up with that? Why is he going to the U.S. of all places?" With other people, I think other cabinet members and so on, including someone who's now returned to Brasilia, capital of Brazil, and been arrested. He was a minister and head of security, therefore, for the Brasilia government complex. For some reason, he's being investigated, even though the transition, the handover of power had already taken place.
Well,
The guy who was in charge of security there under Bolsonaro returned and has been arrested.
But it's a problem. It's a problem. Someone with influence in more than outside of, let's say, its centers. It's in America. The resistance to populism, basically. The establishment is very resistant to the idea of populism or nationalism, any nationalistic or populist ideologies. And someone someone has influence outside of America who also doesn't like it in other countries. Again, you're talking about imperial designs here, right? But the reason Trump was demonized, or that setup of January 6th was played out on why it happened in Brazil was for exactly the same reason. There's someone with a lot of influence decided that they weren't going to allow that kind of a movement to have free reign or free to flourish. Let's say that it had to be demonized. So it doesn't matter when you do it, because it wasn't about overturning the election.
Right.
It's about demonizing, and the same January 6th is about demonizing Trump. It wasn't about changing the election.
No, and ending the protest movement, because that's what happened. That's probably what's going to happen in Brazil now. There were major protests all over the country, including outside military barracks. People were like chanting at the military to step in and intervene. They wanted a military coup to declare this election null and void. So that's probably going to have the same, besides the symbolic effect of demonizing the individual and therefore the lightning rod for the movement, Jair Bolsonaro, it's going to have probably the practical effect of killing that protest movement.
They're deplorable. These are people who don't have any position in civil society.
They'll make arrests. They won't let the protest flourish so much.
So it's cracking down on an ideology, the ideology of populism or nationalism. And what defines Bolsonaro? Resistance against imperialism, decisions that affect the Brazilian people, for example, should be taken within Brazil by the authorities in Brazil, not imposed from without. That's why he was against the whole COVID lockdowns and mandates, and why he got in trouble for that. And that's part of the reason he became persona non grata, because that's his belief. His belief is in nationalism and populism, the will of the people, me as their president, deciding, and we all together decide what's best for us in this country, and fuck the rest of you. And screw your WEF, screw your World Health Organization. You know what I mean? Okay, we'll listen to what you say, but we're making decisions here, and that's not allowed. Yeah. So
Do you realize there's no one else seeing who sees it as we do that I've seen? I'm sure many people have thought it, but there's no influential figures. All the reporting of it, whether it's mainstream or alternative reporting, you're either on Lula's side, so to speak, because you've been traditionally anti-empire,
Mm-hmm.
classic lefty workers' rights, right? And Lula, they remember from the early 2000s, Brazil's economy grew. Lula was good for Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
and they remember that in the 2000s.
Mhm.
And they argue he was unfairly shafted and framed and went to prison unfairly.
Mhm.
Then you've got the other side, which is like, no, this is definitely a setup for Bolsonaro. The election was rigged.
Yeah.
That's what people understand. There's a huge, like, Twitter just deleted en masse on Brazilian Twitter any references to the elections being rigged. That's why people are protesting. They think there's no way that Lula actually won the popular vote last October.
Right.
But anyway,
But times change, is the thing. Times change, and in a world that is increasingly, insecure, that is perceived as being, the world is increasingly frightening and insecure. There's all sorts of economic threats, there's environmental threats. People are being bombarded with those, that kind of fear-mongering over and over again, and have been for several years in particular. What happens is that in any country, people tend to want to group together. They tend to close the doors and say, "What? So you're saying the whole world's a crazy place? There's immigration, there's wars, there's climate disaster, there's pandemics." Well, the natural instinct is to circle the wagons. Natural instinct is protectionism, because people perceive, rightly or wrongly, that there's threats outside of in the world out there, and we need to kind of close down a little bit,
We see it happening in Ireland now.
Right, and people,
Protests last week.
and somebody doesn't want that to happen. They want access to the minds of everybody. They don't want any closed minds.
Open societies.
Right.
Did I send you that CNN link? It's got some details on the thing about the buses. This isn't just a rumor. And that's a long article, damn it, CNN.
Bus.
Yeah, do a search for bus. The article titled, "Command Your Troops, Damn It, How a Series of Security Failures Opened a Path to Insurrection in
Insurrection.
Brazil."
Yeah, right.
Insurrection. All lasted
Love
all of 8
insurrection.
hours. So here's second from last paragraph there. Brazil's intelligence agency said it issued daily alerts ahead of the January 8th to the government and the federal district government, where all these buildings were located, warning the protests would be large and violent. Okay, their intelligence was based on a warning raised by the country's transport agency that an unusual volume of buses had been chartered to Brasilia.
Mm-hmm.
And the government was notified. So, by the intelligence agency. So they knew it was coming. Somebody let that happen. And it was funny, on the day I was seeing, like I said, pro-Lula or pro-Bolsonaro people spin the same images according to their worldview of how they see it.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, look, there's video footage here. The police are taking photos with them. They're letting them in. That did happen, 100%. But the Bolsonaristas are also correct in that 4 hours into what happened, the rioting, they were also arrested. There were 1,500 arrests, and they're still banged up. There's going to be similar J6-style show trials going on in Brazil.
That's why Bolsonaro got out of there as well, because the nature of
he wanted to be distanced from it. Maybe he
well,
got
not just
wind of
distance from it. He wanted to stay out of jail himself.
Okay.
I mean, Lula was in jail. You know what I mean? It's
Right,
it's a bit of a
right.
tradition there
It's
that whenever
dog
whenever
there.
you're out, you probably did something wrong because you got voted out, so you're going to jail. We're going to start a court case, and you'll end up in jail. So he's out of there, because he knows the nature of Brazilian politics.
I wonder, did he leave though, because he knew that what they were about to do there, so he didn't.
He probably
want to
got
be
wind of it,
within reach.
But Lula has to pay the piper now. He got saved. He got his ass saved, basically.
Basically by the CIA types.
He got installed effectively, indirectly by foreign interests. So he owes them now. He's their boy now.
Yeah.
So forget about his lefty, anti-imperial, anti-war past.
And his pro-BRICS thing. Well, he was a founding signatory to BRICS,
Right.
Lula. But he may keep that up. But he's talking about, renewing our alliance with Russia and China. But he owes them. He owes the globalists.
Yeah, the economic thing is open because I think, like I said, they're planning for. People are expecting some kind of, or powers that be are expecting some kind of an economic disaster, and all of those considerations about of the economic ties, BRICS, all that kind of stuff are going to be to a large extent moot. If you know what I mean, there's a bigger show going down. That's not where it's at. That's not going to make any difference to a global economic crisis. and everybody will feel the urge to kind of go into defense mode, you know. But a lot of them won't be able to, is the problem, because they're dependent. Countries that can will. Countries that can't are screwed.
Right.
Because then it's open competition. You know, if you're looking for handouts and everybody else is.
For me, this Brazil issue just it shows how insoluble, as you often say, political problems are at local or macro scales. I mean, does he not? Maduro, Venezuela's president, he's still there. He survived the Guaido bizarre coup of sorts. He survived assassinations with drones. He survived a lot of economic bullshit thrown at by the US, and including Trump. He's like pro-Lula, 100%. He's talking in the same language. This was an attempt at a fascist coup in Brazil, you know. This is Washington doing it, supporting the protesters to help Bolsonaro, mind you, not the other way, not in the way we've described. And, okay, so practically what's he suggesting? He's calling for a renewal of the old kind of direction that Latin America was moving in before, Mercosur, maybe even one currency eventually, a kind of an EU-ification of South America. That's what he would like to see. So, yes, maybe not BRICS level cooperation, but we're closing in, but we'll stick together and we'll survive it. We'll ride this out if we as South America are together. Right? But how the hell is that going to work? If you're supporting such an egregious lie, like the fact is Brazilians didn't vote for Lula. You can't just wash that away and pretend to carry on business as usual in how you see the world. That's a foobar. Maybe not immediately, but down the road, there's no coming back. It's like for the US. It's on a trajectory now where people were shafted. I mean, it's not the will of the people at all. No good can come out of this.
No, but you have to have something coming along. You have to expect that something's coming along that'll make that all irrelevant, you know, to give people something else to think about.
Okay. They're no longer...
Something that makes your stolen election seem like small potatoes.
Okay. So the culture war is about to end up like just a nothing burger. Well, it'll remain relevant, of course, but it's... it won't be what people will be screaming about more of the basics.
Right. Well, that's it. You just downgrade. You just
food, shelter,
lower the bar, if you know what I mean, in terms of what people have to complain about. You know.
Yeah.
If people are complaining about I don't know, the color, that there's not enough colors of new cars to buy, whatever. You know, there's way too much freedom there. You know, it's like first world problems. You give these people some second world problems and then some third world problems, because they'll be much less likely to, you know, the higher the scale and the problems you have, the much less time and energy you have for complaining about anything else, because you're basically focusing on solving those problems, you know, those essential problems. And that's by design or by the natural
course of things.
That seems to be where it's going, you know. And they're planning for it, you know. It seems to be anyway. The elite are planning for that.
Right.
Of course, their plans may not work out the way they're planning, of course, but they're still planning.
Hector Garcia, 56 people watching. Indeed, only 56. But you watch the space.
Who's Hector Garcia?
I have no idea. Commenter here. I think he's laughing at that. Indeed, there's only 56 people watching, but no one else has even come close to figuring out what's going on in Brazil. Not even close. It's either left or right. You're either pro Lula, pro Bolsonaro. No one sees it. And we're still waiting for someone to point out this shift in U.S. politics. There was one article, I found one, and this is hilarious because, you know, we're Russian trolls because we just believe everything that emanates from the Kremlin. Other way around, man. I've seen one article on RT by an analyst there, I forget his name, come close to realizing that what's going on lately in Congress in the US signals a shift that will absorb what Trump wanted, but quietly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about
Boom, boom.
boom boom, the war in Ukraine? The day is approaching, surely, isn't it? The cutoff point. You shared that tweet with me yesterday about from Zakharova,
Yeah.
suggesting it was a final warning about U.S. weapons shipments into Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But she was basically, I won't find it now, she basically pointed out, and they've done it before, but she very pointedly said that, not only will the weapons become fair target, but the Western soldiers and engineers stationed with the weapons will also be fair target.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder how many of them have been inside Ukraine, effectively conducting battlefield operations or assisting in it, that the Russians have specifically avoided hitting because there's too many American or British or French or German military personnel stationed around them. Have they gone out of their way so far to give as much chance as possible? I do wonder, to not hit those systems and maintain the illusion that this is Ukraine versus Russia, and only hit Ukrainian operated systems.
Mm-hmm. I don't think so, because also, I mean, if the West feels it, if NATO feels it's entitled to, put any kind of systems in Ukraine to kill Russian troops, then that's for a game, you know what I mean? But and they have been, of course. I mean, they've been destroying American howitzers and all that kind of stuff. But that's all they've been given, artillery mostly, and they're talking now about giving tanks, There's
It's
something
a bit more than that. Apache helicopters.
Well, they're talking about that now as well.
The British have sent something. Challenger tanks.
They're going to.
Just a few of them. The Patriot missiles, of course.
They're not there yet, though.
They're not there, but they want to bring Yukis over to train them in Oklahoma. They announced that.
Takes a few months, at least.
But does it not suggest that we're approaching a cutoff point where Russia's like, well, they seem to be taking it to the next level?
Yeah. Russia, well, I mean, we talked about this last week about Soledar and Bakhmut.
No, Soledar's fallen since then.
Right. So basically in East Ukraine, there's these two key towns, more or less. I mean, there's other towns around and stuff, and they haven't completed the full operation of what they need to do basically at this point. But there's towns that are they're still in Donbass, in the Donbass area. So Russia's original goal was to control Donbass. That's part of their initial stated primary objectives, was to control Donbass and protect Donbass and Crimea, and they're still in process of doing that. But this week, when they took Soledar, and probably within the next week or two, they're probably going to, already the Ukrainians are leaving Bakhmut. Those two towns are right beside. If you take those towns, you control a kind of main artery of supply line, a main road supplying weapons to that area, basically, or to the east of Ukraine. So they cut off that supply line. So they're obviously focusing on cutting off supply lines. That's been an agenda all along, but it takes a while to get there, basically, to get to the point where you're able to do that. So they've made some significant inroads in achieving that both goals of basically protecting Donbass and liberating all of Donbass and cutting off at least one section of the supply routes from Western Ukraine. There's a massive amount of troops in Belarus who've been there for several months, mobilizing, etc., Russian troops and Belarusian troops. The only really plausible reason why that's happening is for an offensive south from there into the west of Ukraine to cut off the kind of first section, let's say, of the supply route, the main supply routes from Poland of NATO weaponry. So yeah, it's gearing up to that, and it's happening you see in response to that they start talking about Apache helicopters and sending tanks, and also, there's like hundreds, maybe 1,000, 2,000. The various EU countries, various NATO states in Europe have something like 1,200 German Leopard tanks that are potentially available. But a lot of countries are stalling. Some of them are saying now, yeah, we'll give some, and blah blah blah. But it's very piecemeal, and Russia just carries on, Okay, it gets delayed by these moves of NATO, etc. But the outcome is a foregone conclusion to this conflict, which is that Russia will achieve what it wants to achieve. So what's the point in if it goes on for another year, which I don't think it will, but say it goes on for another 6 months, 18 months, what will have been the result? What will have been the goal, or what will have been the benefit to anyone from this conflict? Certainly it's none of the benefits that are being talked about, and the benefits that people think will be achieved, and what many people are fighting for. The Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians, what they think they're fighting for and what they're supporting, none of those are going to be achieved. Of course, there is a benefit, which is that large amounts of money, particularly taxpayer money, American and European taxpayer money, goes to weapons manufacturers, which then comes back to members of the political class via lobbyists. So it's one big club and you're not in it type thing, So that's the obvious. That's ultimately going to be the only result. The only positive result will be
for the West.
For the West will be filling the pockets of defense contractors and their political allies. That's already happening, and there'll be a benefit for Russia, but Russia had its goals in mind at the very beginning, and it will achieve its goals. Europe, what are they going to achieve? Not a lot. They'll be net losers in this conflict, but they carry on anyway, because ultimately you have to assume then that politicians don't care about the welfare of the ordinary people in Europe. What they're doing, they're pursuing this war, they're fueling this war and helping to continue this war for their own personal profit and aggrandizement and power, as they see it. So but that seems to be that's to happen. That's to play out. Russia, there's more stuff to happen in Ukraine. It's not over yet. There's more fairly major events to occur. But like yesterday, they fired another salvo of missiles at infrastructure in Ukraine, critical infrastructure, military infrastructure, etc. in Ukraine. And they kind of changed their tactics in a certain sense from previous missile salvos, where instead of one wave, they did it in 2 waves. And obviously it's fairly simple military strategy. It's like the Ukrainians do have some, a certain amount. We don't know exactly how much, because all of the claims made by the Ukrainian government, Zelensky, etc., in the aftermath of these missile salvos, is that, we shot down like 80% of the missiles, but you don't see very much. You see very, very little videos, and there's lots of cell phones and stuff, but very little videos of any missiles being shot down or any air defense actually happening. But there is some air defense in Ukraine. So what the Russians did this time was to but they launched drones in the direction of where the missiles were going to go, and those drones then provoke the air defense, whatever air defense the Ukrainians have, they provoke those, and then they get to see with radar, etc., get to see where the air defense is. And the second wave of actual missiles can include those air defense systems as targets in the strike. But of course, the only response the Kiev authorities have to that is to not respond to the drones. But then the drones hit. You know what I mean? So Russia can have it either. For Russia, either way is good. You can either take our bait and expose your air defense systems by trying to shoot down the drones, or you can keep them quiet and we don't find out where they are, but then our drones hit the targets they were going to hit anyway, so you don't get to shoot down the drones. And then, in any case, your air defenses are pretty crap, so most of our missiles that we send in the second wave, even if you try and shoot them down, are going to reach their targets. So it's pretty bad for Ukraine. It's bizarre. It is. The whole thing has been a meat grinder from the get-go. What
do you
Ukrainians.
think of Colonel McGregor reckons that Bakhmut and Solidar, that
Yeah.
80 kilometers of defense line.
Mhm.
They've sort of almost deliberately gone slow and turned it into a mousetrap where they were like, yeah, keep sending. Come on. We're not moving. We're just staying here. You just keep sending. And that's resulted in, well, some crazy figures, like 25,000 casualties is one of the high-end casualties, not just dead and wounded, but whole brigades wiped out. Because remember, that tiny town, Solidar, is 10,000 people. So, well, most of those people have long since fled, but that gives you an idea of the number of buildings you can occupy. And yet, brigade wave after wave of people have been thrown at it to liberate it from the Ukrainian side. And that began in August, a fight for that town.
Yeah, it was on and off.
It's
Yeah.
5 months for 10,000. It's
Well, it wasn't continually in conflict since August.
Okay.
It was the latest offensive is a few weeks old, but it's well, what are they going to do? The Ukrainians are going to fight, or they're going to give up? You know, well, they can retreat, and they have retreated from that area, and I think they're retreating from Bakhmut right now because they're not willing to. It's really bad. Like, they're not willing to lose large, you know, even more soldiers for no gain, basically. But then what's, you know, it's like, this is like Second World War strategies. It's Second World War warfare, basically. You know what I mean? Where you're just, the Ukrainians in particular are just throwing bodies at artillery shells. For what? Just to say that we resisted.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to. Apparently in Kiev, nobody's allowed to see sense and negotiate any kind of surrender.
They might be forced to.
But, well, not until the last Ukrainian.
What
right?
if those troops, but before then, though, realistically, those troops are going to turn around and go back to Kiev, no? Mutiny. Well, that
Maybe.
is something Putin expressly wished for
Yeah.
a year ago when it started.
Yeah.
It's just, it's taken so long to get to that point.
Yep. Well, the thing is, you have to remember that this is, again, getting back to the genesis of this conflict was after 2014, the coup in Ukraine, the US-backed coup in Kiev that installed a client regime, basically, a Western client regime in Kiev with the express purpose of building up the Ukrainian military, which they did. Poroshenko's on record as saying that NATO built up the Ukrainian military since 2014. I think he was saying it in 2017 or 18. They've been building it up, and they built it up for the following few years. And they put most of the troops, or they built most of the defences or installations, military installations, like as in bunkers, trenches, fortified positions, all that kind of stuff, on that contact line that you see now. We showed the contact line last week in the east of Ukraine. Because the whole point of that was to invade eastern Ukraine and ideally Crimea and take them back, quote unquote, and then from there, you know, threaten Russia. So most of the infrastructure and most of the places that the Ukrainians have, most of the effort and energy and they put into, you know, building their defences, or their, not so much defences, but their installations, their military installations, is along that line. That's why most of the fighting is there, because that's where they set themselves up, basically.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of weird. You know, they didn't. It's a very strange situation. They didn't. The Ukrainians, the fact that they are along that contact line, which is just outside, along more or less the borders of Donbass, makes it pretty clear that was their intent. That was an offensive move that began in 2014. They started to do that in 2014, building positions along the border of Donbass in order to attack Donbass, invade Donbass, and then Crimea. So that's where their fight is now. But they're more or less they're using those formerly offensive positions as defensive positions.
Right.
And once that falls, they don't really have much of any significance in other parts of the country in the West because they never expected to. The whole building up of the NATO build-up of the Ukrainian military was designed as offensive. They didn't build it up over the past 8 years from 2014 as from the point of view of a defensive installments across the whole country to stop a Russian invasion.
Yeah.
They set it up as an offensive operation on Donbass, on the line of Donbass.
Yeah, and it exposes the lie of 2014 that
Right.
the Russians, quote, have invaded Ukraine.
Right.
They didn't. Remember, we mentioned it before, NATO inspectors went and they found 0 Russians and 0 Russian equipment.
Yeah.
It was purely a local issue. And so Kiev actually, behind all the media garbage of that time, they went, Russians are not stepping in here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Even, in fact, they're calling for ceasefire and they're pulling Zakharchenko and all the other Donbass leaders up to Minsk for talks. Merkel agreed. The other guy, Hollande, Flamby, he's like, great guys, this is excellent. We've got the Russians to basically cease and desist. Now we'll just
Carry on
spend the
with-
time building up
Yeah.
an offensive force for you to take back what's yours.
If they were expecting a Russian invasion, they would have had defensive installations all across Ukraine.
Yeah.
Why don't they have them? Because they went on the offensive. And Russia responded to, at the last minute almost, before it got too late, they responded to that obviously planned offensive operation by Ukraine/NATO against ethnic Russians in Donbass and Crimea by extension. And then potentially they saw, well, listen, if they take over Donbass and take back Crimea, then they're right in the border with Russia. We're not having that. No country in the world would allow that. An aggressive country with a NATO-trained army on their borders with clear intent to cause you problems, nobody's going to accept that, and you're going to move in and try and stop them. That's what they've done. And yeah, so I don't know. If you look, when we looked at it last week, they don't have a lot of. Most of them are on that contact line. Most of the Ukrainian military on that along that contact line, so they can't just leave them there and let them be slaughtered, because then it would be the complete collapse of the Ukrainian military. They have to move them out. Have to retreat, and they are in the process of retreating from those two areas in particular. They've left Soledar and they're leaving from Bakhmut right now. But that's all, in a certain sense, that's just one move by the Russians, and the Russians appear to have another plan, which is to, at some point in the near future, to definitively cut off the source of this conflict, which is NATO arms supplies.
Right. Checking in with the Washington media, the Atlantic headline yesterday, Ukraine will win if it keeps getting better weapons. Do you see how they're thinking it from their side? And the Russians are like, well, then we will win if we stop them from getting those weapons.
But the most important part of that sentence is keep getting, what was it?
Better weapons.
Better weapons. Who's saying that?
The Atlantic.
Who are they speaking for?
The
defense contractors, the people who are producing weapons. It's like, change the commodity, to like cheese or something, and it's coming from the cheese conglomerate, the Global Cheese Organization. We're selling a product here, basically. You know what I mean? And we need to keep, pushing our product because it's good for business, man. That's how sad the whole thing is, There's all reams and reams of words and written and spoken about all the nuances of this and democracy and freedom. And they don't realize it's way, way more simple than that, It's just pure greed, pure personal profit. That's what's behind it all. People clothe it in all sorts of fanciful notions and freedom and democracy and, us poor Ukrainian people fighting for the freedom of the world. I mean, how delusional can you be? Like, those people have no insight whatsoever. Have zero insight, zero ability to penetrate through a facade of utter bullshit. They just look at it and go, "That's real. That's true," and they don't have any senses. No insight means no senses. And these people are so bad that they don't even have the normal 5 basic senses. I'm not talking about a super sense, a sixth sense. I'm talking about 5 basic senses, at least in metaphor for bullshit. They can't even smell bullshit. Right. It's like if they were literally confronted with a wall of bullshit and told this is
cheese
or, rose petals. They would go, yes, this is rose petals, and we are fighting for the rose petals, as the shit fell on their head, Yeah. And they say, what, do you not have a sense of smell? But, so that's that's like an analogy for their inability to just, to read reality and even basic human psychology, they live in like a fairy story, you know, in a make-believe Disney story, goodies and baddies, and it's really bad. Like, I mean, they just have no idea, and then you have to like watch them posting stuff on Twitter and scroll, yeah, whatever, yeah. It's just like at that. I'm not like, I can't take them seriously anymore, you know.
Yeah.
But they're so forthright, you know. They're very convinced of their position, you know, even though it's so divorced from reality. But whatever. Yeah. What about Klaus Schwab?
The brain implants.
Klaus Schwab is worried about something. This is something. Klaus Schwab has a lot of dark thoughts, you know.
Yeah.
He's scared of a lot of stuff. He wants us to be scared of a lot of stuff. I don't know if he's scared of it personally, and he's just sharing his fear, or if he actually wants us to be afraid as well, or to be afraid when he's not really. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is he the instigator of the fear, or is it his own fear? Is he genuinely well motivated? He wants to share a threat to all of us, me included, me, Klaus Schwab included. I am like you. This is what he's scared about now.
Pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
Klaus is a doomer, like. He's big time. He's big time doomer. But
was that his own production, WF, with the music and all, or did someone add that on?
I don't know. Probably. I wouldn't be surprised if WF. Yeah, I mean,
produced that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they gotta catapult the propaganda. Gotta get into your brain.
They're usually, you know,
visuals,
fluffy-go-lucky.
I know.
2030.
But this is serious, Neil. Very serious.
Right.
We are talking about a devastating cyber attack.
They were
on you personally.
They were on that immediately with COVID. It was bizarre how quick it is. Just people were just adjusting to the news that we're in a global pandemic, and they were like, "The cyber attack's coming." The what?
Well, this is obviously afterwards, because he said now COVID-19 crisis will appear as we'll look back on it as because it's gone now. You know, the COVID crisis is gone, but he's here to warn us that the COVID crisis was small potatoes because there's a devastating cyber attack coming.
People interpret that as, okay, so he and or his buddies are planning to pull the switch on everything.
Not until they get you off gas and oil first. Get you on the heat pump and electric stoves, and then we'll pull the lever on the cyber attack, because then you'll be totally dependent on us.
Well, no, then there'll be nothing. Then you'll have nothing.
Then we can turn it back.
Then you'll be happy.
Yeah. We can turn it back on if you are very good boys.
Okay, so it'll be like gaslighting. For real.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like, it's weird. Like, he's talking about a deadly cyber attack, and he shows all that power going off in the city. And at the same time, he and others are promoting that everybody should become dependent on the electric grid solely. In preparation for the cyber attack, you should be entirely vulnerable. Do not get your own generator.
Yeah.
Because this is bad for the planet. You must be hooked up to the grid. Because then with my sweaty hands I can pull the lever and shut you off from the grid. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, that's a crazy plan if they do that. That's crazy, because the whole thing is dependent on the internet, the ability to reach people's brains. Yeah. If people go without the internet for 3 days, they'll de-brainwash a lot of them. That's all it takes. They just need to disconnect it from the mirage, right? So these guys pulling the plug to do that, they're going to backfire. They're going to lose their mind control. The main means of mind control.
The internet.
And comms, media.
Let's play this one, because this is the unedited one. The background was added, but it was for dramatic effect, you know. But apparently it's just a speech.
We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack. To use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity to reflect on the lessons the cybersecurity community can draw and improve our preparedness
2020.
for a potential cyber pandemic.
Cyber pandemic. What's a cyber pandemic?
No idea.
Is that what, like, a virus can infect your computers?
Right.
Smart, Klaus. Smart. That's really good. I like that.
And the virus attack will come from
Wuhan.
someone, not us.
Wuhan. China.
So yeah, that's from 2020.
A cyber pandemic.
It's the thing he really wanted to see happen
Computer.
or talk about. That was his shtick.
Computers being... Will there be a vaccine for the cyber pandemic, though?
Can you vaccinate computers against cyber pandemic, Scotty?
Sure.
Sure.
You just get,
Bill Gates.
I don't know. Malware bites. Get Kaspersky. It's Russian.
Yeah. The cyber attack. A devastating cyber attack. He probably lies at night, you know.
Well,
He's
yeah.
having dreams like, you know, like sweating and twisting and turning, thrashing around in bed, you know, and it's in a fevered dream about cyber attack.
Yeah,
Devastating cyber attack. No.
him and Bill Gates both. They dream of a world in chaos or something. I don't know, so that their solutions, so that they can step in and become a saviors of the planet or something.
Mm. Yeah.
That's pretty.
They want to be serious God complex, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know swine flu?
Yeah, 2009.
There was one before that, though, I think, as well. In the
Well, foot and mouth disease,
70s.
2001.
There was originally a swine flu, but the swine flu's been around for a
Oh,
while.
yeah, there was a vaccine campaign as a result.
Yeah, there was a
no uptake, scandal.
Yeah, there was rollout
77.
for exactly. So just play that, Scotty. 12 deaths.
This is Channel 7's 11 o'clock Action News with Bill Bonds, John Kelly, and Detroit's #1 news team.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Bonds, and here's a look at what's happening tonight. And what's happening is that the swine flu vaccination program ground to a halt from coast to coast today. There have been now 12 reported deaths so far, with victims dying just a few hours after receiving those inoculative shots. All of the victims were elderly persons, and all, we are told, died of apparent heart attacks. In the state of Michigan, the state health director, Maurice Risen, ordered a stop to all swine flu shots after 3 Michigan men died hours after receiving their vaccinations. Health officials estimate that 10,000 Michigan people have already received their shots, and President Gerald Ford told ABC Television News tonight that he intends to get his vaccination.
Because he's got a death wish. That was
12.
That was back in the day when people dying from suspected vaccine injury was a thing. Was something that people cared about back in the good old days. Nowadays
It
it's
was
meh,
quaint.
whatever. I don't believe you. Vaccines are great. mRNA is awesome. mRNA is going to save the world. Yeah.
It really shows how far the political and media elites have just gone since then, you know. At least then they could pull in the reins a bit. They kind of, you know, intelligently game a few things ahead. Okay, people are starting to drop dead. That means the numbers are going to go way up. There'll be a backlash. Some heads will roll, so we'll just pull the brake on it now. Whereas today, it's like, I don't care. Millions, keep going. There's a guy in British MP was basically fired from the Conservative Party last week because, well, ostensibly because he used the comparison of, he didn't compare, he said that what's going on now could be the worst thing, humanitarian crisis since the Holocaust.
He said he was quoting a doctor who said that to him.
An Israeli doctor, no less.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he got torn apart for anti-Semitism, but really, when they actually spoke more freely, it's because he broke the party line. You're not allowed to discuss vaccine injuries, and that's from. I'm talking about British MP Andrew Bridgen. That's despite the man himself having been vaccinated twice with AstraZeneca, which has been recalled because of the vaccine harms it was causing. What he's suggesting is that maybe we should look at these mRNA ones, and no, you're fired.
Right.
Which, I didn't know you could actually fire an elected official, but apparently you can now in Britain. But no, that's how far gone, the situation is. This is the hill our political elites today are apparently going to
get vaccine injured on.
Yeah.
Or
get their heads lopped, whatever kind of backlash comes down the road.
If that happened.
They don't care.
The CDC and FDA this week published information, a surveillance signal, saying that it is very likely to that the Pfizer's shot is very likely to represent a true clinical risk, specifically strokes in people over 65. All people are doing is saying...
YouTube, just to whoever's watching, take note. CDC said, not us, CDC, health authorities.
CDC, FDA said there's a possible link between Pfizer's shot and strokes in over 65s. That's just, when they come out and officially say it, there's a lot of other people have been saying that for a long time, and not just, not just in people over 65, but in various different age groups. And back in the day, back in the 70s, that 70s news anchor there, he would have been all over that. He would have been like, yeah, this needs to stop, and we need to investigate. Especially now that COVID isn't COVID anymore in a certain sense. I mean, when people say COVID, they think of people are dying, oh my God, lockdown, socially distanced, etc., etc. The virus at this point, Omicron-based, is...
we're on to Kraken now, though, Joe.
I know, but that's just... There's still the legacy. There's still the, the descendants of Omicron, basically, and it's a little more than a head cold. So at that point, when something is just a head cold, why would you not, and with evidence even from the CDC and FDA that there's maybe something that needs to be looked in here in terms of association with mRNA shots and strokes, you have no reason not to, no reason that isn't financial, not to just put things on hold and do some investigation. Is that the kind of thing that get you banned on YouTube, saying that a virus that has evolved into something that is innocuous for the vast majority of people, i.e. the head cold, but there is evidence, even from the CDC and FDA are admitting that there's evidence that it may be linked to strokes. Would it get you banned from YouTube for saying that maybe you should pause the vaccine rollout, stop giving them to people, and start an investigation? Just to make sure that the vaccines are as awesome as they say they are, and in fact they're not injuring people, especially since most people don't need a vaccine for a head cold. Will that get you banned from YouTube?
We'll find out in about 20 minutes.
All right, fair enough.
Going by our track record, it just takes voice recognition software.
Maxine.
To hear Joe.
I said Maxine. It's a friend of mine, Maxine. Shut up. Stupid YouTube. I said Maxine.
Well, it's getting elected official in the UK fired, banned. So yeah, it is. Definitely. And that shithead Hancock then stepped up. He's still in Parliament, right? He's still a backbencher MP.
Right.
Steps up and does the right honourable gentleman, addressing obviously the Prime Minister, Sunak, agree with me that, we must stop these horrific anti-vax, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The British media last week is just like anti-Semitism, anti-vax.
Yeah.
Blend it all together into a stew.
Right.
And just throw it out there.
You can do anti-Semitism for everything. Everything can be anti-Semitic, They that's the best one to throw in. Mix. If something you don't like, mix in anti-Semitism with it, and done. And it's cooked. That was Hat Mancock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is he talking about it? Does he have some vested interest in the vaccines? Is he, 'cause he's the one?
yeah.
Yeah. There was latest, just for people who don't know, there was latest a few days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, latest Twitter files. And this time was on the Russiagate files. And the short story is that basically the whole Russiagate thing was false, specifically in terms of Russian bots being all over Twitter and Facebook and other social media in order to, influence American elections. Twitter files, the Twitter files produced this time by Matt Taibbi, show that there was absolutely no significant Russian influence whatsoever.
Not
and
just
that
the
was
elections, but in
entirely-
subsequent campaigning issues. So when Devin Nunes was seeking the release of some files, and that hashtag began, release the memo.
Yeah.
The counter to that was, where did this come from? And they tracked, it was happening all over the place. The Brits were doing it too. The Guardian, with their hacks, were like coming up with these studies, bringing in academics as well to show psychographic maps of interactions online and who are the key players pushing these things. It was all total bullshit. They skewed the data. And Twitter themselves, what was interesting about the Taibbi's latest is that the discussions inside Twitter are honorable, because they were like, what are these people talking about? We've got journalists and we've got congressmen and spooks writing to us, warning us about all these trolls. And then they're going and checking them out on a case-by-case basis. And they're like, no, this started organically. And there's even one where it's a great little quote. I don't know if it's Joe Roth or someone else, but someone high up on Twitter is like, maybe we shouldn't feed the congressional trolls. I mean, they saw it for what it was. They were being swarmed by the bot army of the Western power elite, not the Russian one. There was no Russian one. And that they were projecting this out because they wanted to suppress an organic dissident campaign from within the United States, from ordinary Americans. So that was a good breakdown to see that. Well, we don't learn anything. Some people are criticizing this because this isn't getting the kind of media attention. It's not us that needs to hear it. It's the people who don't engage in social media who need to hear it. This needs to be breaking news on CNN, BBC, and so on. Are these revelations any good as, threads on Twitter?
Just confirm what we already know.
Yeah.
It's good to have.
But it ends up tragically being just a bubble, which is what Musk and Taibbi and all these other genuinely non-aligned, independent, non-partisan writers were trying to cut through. That they're not. The point is, they were selected because they're not partisan, and still, it just ends up in a relatively small echo chamber. It doesn't get on USA Today and NYT and so on, but
yeah, and
because people out there still believe Russian trolls.
Yeah, well,
Or
it
what?
lodged in their brain back then because of the media coverage of the lie.
Do you ever hear of? This came up in connection with it. Does Reality Winner ring a bell?
No, in terms of what?
In terms of what? That's actually the name of a person. I kid you not.
Oh,
Her
yeah,
surname was Winner.
I saw it. I saw that on Twitter. Someone wrote in Reality Winner is blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, is that a TV show?
Yeah, I thought it was a code name for someone. I think. No, this was a patriotic young American who had served somewhere, ended up working for an NSA contractor as a translator. She was a linguist, I think.
That's not a real name, Reality
That's
Winner.
her real name. Her surname's Winner, and her father decided to name her Reality because it would be funny. Poor girl. Her name is Reality Winner.
Wow.
So she is working at the NSA, well, no, for a contractor to the NSA on some unrelated topic. But she comes across a file somewhere. And what it is, it's an internal report, NSA, on Russian trolls, on the presence and the extent of Russian trolls online in the United States, with some data, some examples. Maybe they're blacked out. I can't remember. Anyway, she's like, wow. Well, this is crazy. Oh, what attracted to her was the certainty in both the title and the summary of the report that it was Russian GRU. There's no evidence connected, supplied for the report, but it was just spoke with total conviction that they had uncovered a Russian troll operation in the United States, yet directly controlled by Russian intelligence. She's like, damn, this is wow. And this isn't being published? No. So she decided to be, in the spirit of the times, 2017-18, to be a patriot and to leak it to The Intercept. It completely backfired. The Intercept published it, and they published it as a bombshell Russian report. And The Intercept, too, probably thought, this is great. We're going to get lots of traction here because this is what the powers that be want to hear, right? That's not what happened, though. She was tracked down, arrested, and charged, and has
5 years in prison. Yeah.
5 years in prison. She's serving the longest sentence for a whistleblower. If you, officially, in a sense, Julian Assange is serving longer. Snowden, of course, is barred and is hiding from the US, but this is the longest prison sentence for a whistleblower. It's weird, though. Why would they do that? That she came across something. The only thing I could think was that...
What did she come across exactly?
I'll put it to Scott here. I think it's embedded inside the Intercept article that was published. An NSA report on the operations of a Russian troll army, quote, something like that, inside the United States around about 2017. No, it was more than that. Okay, so there you see the date is June 2017. Intercept gets this from Reality Winner. Headline, Top Secret NSA Report Details Russian Hacking Effort Days Before 2016 Election. It should have been bombed. This should have nailed. This should have been grist for the mill for the Mueller investigation. This would have, forget the Russian bot operation going on, Putin's chef over in Petersburg. This was going to be nail Trump to the wall. So, opening headline, paragraph, Russian military intelligence executed a cyber attack on at least one voting software supplier and sent spear phishing emails to more than 100 local election officials just days before last November's presidential election. So, sorry, I got completely wrong in my summary of that. I was suggesting that there was trolls, online trolling. This is way more sophisticated. This was an attempt to actually interfere with...
Well, to access voter registration rolls.
Yeah.
But the end result was it was unclear whether any changes had been made to the voter registration rolls. So basically it was a nothing burger. Nothing happened. There's nothing they could pin anything on. They couldn't show that there was any interference or any hacking or any influence on the election at all. And so she just... It went nowhere, basically. It didn't help them. It didn't help the lie about Russia hacking our elections, because it didn't go anywhere. It didn't show any Russian interference in elections at all.
Right.
But she was just simply given a sentence for leaking classified documents.
But something did happen. There was a spear phishing operation at these. This is where I think maybe there was an actual attempt to hack the rolls.
An email
that
phishing,
was caught.
An email phishing operation.
Okay, maybe it didn't get anywhere then. Can you scroll down to I think they embed the report. That's the title of it, I think. Okay. Yeah, this is the... I mean, it was elaborate. The thing that was BS to me was not that this may not have happened, but that they had no evidence that it came from outside of the US.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if what she came across was something she shouldn't have seen, because it actually describes something that was going on internally in the US. And hence that's why she got punished so hard, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She thought she was doing what the political flavor of the day wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And that this should have been, like I said, this would have been awesome news for the Mueller investigation.
Mm-hmm.
But instead they buried it, and they buried her for 5 years.
Yeah.
I just thought the whole thing was bizarre, and I couldn't believe that her name was Reality Winner. Like, what? Anyway, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just one of those quirks of the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
There was another Twitter files released this week from Alex Berenson.
Mm. Yeah.
Is he's on the team now?
Except he just published it as a Substack.
Okay.
It wasn't on Twitter. It was only a few on Twitter and then a link to his Substack. It was about the COVID files, yeah.
It was.
Mm.
Was there anything of? Did you see it?
Yeah. Particularly Dem politicians wanted to, as we know, were sending requests to Twitter to shut down people who were disagreeing with lockdowns and with
while Trump was president.
Yeah, but it was Democrats.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. It's like, so far Twitter files are just yep, yeah, know that, yeah, been saying that for 2-3 years, yep. I mean, it's nice to have confirmation of it, but it's, you know, to know that you're reading reality correctly, you know. So yeah, and there was on that, just meant to say, on that Russian missile salvo yesterday, they had in Dnipro, they had an apartment building, and Ukrainian NAFO Twitter is going crazy about it, calling for the annihilation of Russia, etc., etc.
The Guardians,
except and the Guardian and all of the Western media are carrying it as, you know,
barbaric Russian war crimes, blah blah blah.
Russian missile direct, you know, allowing it to be assumed that Russian missile deliberately targeted a residential apartment complex.
Just because they're Russians.
In which 20 people died because they're Ukrainians. Yeah, so just kill Ukrainian citizens, basically. Yeah. Just because that's a war objective, you know, kill Ukrainian citizens, although they obviously haven't been doing that. So obviously there's more to the story. And thankfully, that Luka Arestovich actually spilled the beans, and none of them are very happy about it. You can just listen to him here. He tells you what actually happened.
То есть возможности в Днепре сбить вот эту ракету хорошей возможности не было?
Нет, по ее сбили, она упала на подъезд.
Она упала на подъезд.
Да, ну, как бы она взорвалась, когда упала.
So you go, basically he's saying that he's admitting, and he would be, I suppose, in a position to know, and there's no reason for him to say this if it's not true. Even if he didn't know, even if it's just a theory, why would he say it? He says that the missile was partly shot down by Ukrainian air defense, but not, and as a result it landed on the apartment complex, i.e. the apartment complex was not the target. Which is obviously in keeping with Russian tactics so far, which have been to not go around slaughtering Ukrainian civilians just for the fun of it, you know, as they'd like you to believe. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Any more news that is not fit to print but has been printed?
Jordan Peterson being summoned for social media re-education.
Yeah.
Basically, he has no choice there, right? He either does it or he's no longer an accredited psychologist in Ontario.
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
He's been asked. He has to go through reprogramming. Yeah, reprogramming, re-education, or whatever it is.
They use those terms like
it's
dystopia.
Sensitization to social media, whatever, and they about 12 people or something like that over the course of a few years sent complaints about him about tweets that he made, saying that as a psychologist he shouldn't be saying this kind of thing. One of them was to a guy who was talking about overpopulation and going on about how we need, there's too many people on the planet, and Peterson tweeted back at him saying, "You're free to leave anytime you want." And they said the person who complained to the Canadian psychological board, whatever, board of psychologists or whatever it is, said that here was a Canadian psychologist encouraging someone to commit suicide. and this is not something that a psychologist should do. So he should have his license revoked. And then various other things. The one where he tweeted about that. What's that guy's name who had her?
Paige. Ellen Page.
Yeah. Talking about calling whoever did that, butcher surgeons, whatever, that one, and a few others similar. That apparently he's not allowed. It's harm, just harm, Neil, causing harm to people who read a tweet.
Like a microaggression.
Microaggressions to people who read tweets from a psychologist, which is just beyond the pale, and he should be stripped of his license as a result. And these people have apparently taken these complaints seriously. 12 out of, millions of people, obviously, who have seen his tweets or seen his lectures or whatever, and this is all they can come up with. The odd kind of like, angry tweet, let's say, or snarky tweet, and this on the balance of that. So there's no balance, basically. You have to be completely squeaky clean, right? If 100 million people or 10 million, 20 million people watch your videos and 12 of them don't like some of the things you said, then those 12 people have to have their grievances addressed officially. And you have to address those grievances officially by going through a sensitization program conducted by other psychologists in Canada who will teach you how to be more psychologist-y on Twitter. And if you don't do it, you're going to have your license revoked because you're no longer a psychologist.
Well, shit, they revoked thousands of doctors' license in 2020.
Yeah.
Because they refused to go along with it. Or in some cases, just because they dared to treat COVID.
Yeah.
A couple of items I want to put up here. This is from the conspiracy theory to actual reality in less than 6 months department. Wall Street Journal asks 2 weeks ago, are vaccines fueling new COVID variants? The virus appears to be evolving in ways that evade immunity. Yeah.
Thanks, vaccines.
Yeah. What was his name? Van den Bosch, 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
Conspiracy theorist.
They're lucky that the variants that it's producing are, like I said,
weak.
Nothing.
Could have been worse. And one final item from the conspiracy theory to reality in less than 6 months department. San Francisco outlet reports. San Francisco Standard. I don't know what that is exactly, but headline, these doctors pushed masking COVID lockdowns on Twitter. Turns out they don't exist. That's actually from last month. Scroll down a bit there. There's some great examples. I think some of them you might remember.
There's a handful of them, yeah.
You remember, people have seen on Twitter, and they take screenshots whenever the exact same tweet is repeated like dozens and hundreds of times by bots, or even by real people who just behave like bots.
The transgender doctor of sociology and feminist studies with a keen interest in poetry, who used the they-them pronouns, was in fact a stock photo described on deposit photos.
It's not that they just were not doctors. They were not actual people. Yeah. So this is what I'm trying to explain to people, but it's so hard until they get a real example. Back in the 2000s, the Pentagon created sock puppet armies of people who would themselves then create hundreds of fake accounts. And just like, as the Snowden files explained explicitly when he published NSA PowerPoint presentations, their job was to disrupt, divert, and destroy the narrative. Especially if it was against our interests. So these guys, I think they have some examples of their tweets or their videos.
The one above there, the paragraph just above at the top, the guy said, sad to announce that my husband, so, there's a guy saying my husband has entered a coma after being in hospital with COVID. The doctors are unsure if he will come out. This year has been the toughest of my life, losing my sister to the virus. This is the first time in my life I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that was all from somebody who...
That was all horseshit.
Doesn't exist, basically.
Somebody who sat there being paid and or enjoying fucking with your head.
Yeah.
Scroll down beyond the stock images of two examples. I think they show some of their tweets and the numbers of likes and so on. Maybe not.
Up at the top, they talked about that.
They write about it. People should check that article out. They have some examples. I think they were there were people who were fake doctors getting liked and retweeted hundreds of thousands of times. Oh, those could have been fake numbers too. I mean, who knows if Twitter was, augmenting to help them gain a following, augmenting their fake numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But they accused everyone else who was actually trying to, warn them that this isn't what they're saying it is, of being fake and firing them. Actual doctors lost their licenses. Fake ones were promoted, and the lie goes around the world.
Yep.
And took it over.
You gotta be careful from them lies going around the world. You gotta protect yourself. You have to actively assume that, including from authorities, that there's something maybe more to the story that isn't being told, Because, well, that's the lesson from the past few years, right? That even authorities get it wrong sometimes. I'm not going to say they're lying. They get it wrong sometimes. So be cautious and, do your own research on top of the excellent research from science and government. Look into it a bit further, think, and we're banned for saying that.
Yeah, I think that's officially now a far-right talking point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, whatever. Anyway, on that far-right talking
Social
point,
re-education for you.
Yeah. I need to
And you, Scotty, you don't escape.
I need to go for reprogramming. Yeah, so on that far-right talking point, we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show, and thanks for commenting. Don't forget to smash all the buttons. We'll be back next week with another one on whatever's been going on between now and then. So until then, have a good one.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye all.
Can't stop the signal now.